I want to talk to you about fooling yourself, because of all the people you're going to fool in your life, and you're going to fool plenty, the easiest one to fool is you. And that, my friends, is the root of most of the trouble in the world. Let me start with something that happened to me at Princeton. I decided to have lunch with different groups each week, not just the physicists, but the philosophers, the biologists, everybody. Broaden my horizons, you know. So one week I sat with the philosophers, and they were having a very earnest discussion about a book called Process and Reality by Whitehead. They were using words in a funny way, and I couldn't quite understand what they meant, but I didn't want to interrupt, so I mostly kept my mouth shut, which for me is practically a medical event. They kept using the term essential object in some technical way that Whitehead had apparently defined. After much discussion, the professor leading the seminar turned to me and asked, "Mr. Feynman, would you say an electron is an essential object?" Well, I hadn't read the book, so I had no idea what the phrase meant, but I said I'd try to answer if they'd first answer my question. Is a brick an essential object? You would not believe the chaos that erupted. One man stood up and said a brick as an individual, specific brick is an essential object. Another man said, no, it's the general idea of bricks that's essential. They went back and forth, debating the brickness of bricks and couldn't agree at all. And I thought, how is it possible that they've been reading and discussing this book for weeks and they can't even agree on whether a simple brick fits their definition? If they couldn't handle a brick, what hope did they have with electrons? My original plan was to ask next about the inside of a brick. Nobody's ever really seen the inside. You only see surfaces when you break one apart. So the inside is really a theory, just like an electron is a theory. But we never got that far because they were still arguing about the brick. That experience taught me to be very suspicious of fields where people use fancy language to disguise the fact that they haven't really defined what they're talking about. A similar thing happened when I was invited to a conference on the ethics of equality. They sent around a reading list beforehand. I looked at the first page, hadn't read a single book. Second page, nothing. The whole list. I hadn't read any of them. I felt like an illiterate, but I went anyway, figuring I'd sit quietly and listen. The conference split us into subgroups. Mine was supposed to discuss the ethics of equality in education. The Jesuit priest kept talking about ethics, and the other people were using the word in ways that seemed to mean different things. So, finally, I asked a simple question. Can we agree on what we mean by ethics before we discuss it? They couldn't. We spent the whole session trying to define the word, and nobody could agree. These were supposed to be the leading minds thinking about these problems, and they couldn't even get past the first word. What I realized was this. In many fields, people have learned to talk in a way that sounds profound, but doesn't actually connect to anything concrete. It's all clouds and no rain. And this brings me to the biggest problem of all, which I call cargo cult science. During the war, cargo planes used to land on Pacific islands and deliver all sorts of wonderful supplies. After the war, the islanders wanted the planes to come back, so they built fake runways. They lit fires along the sides. They carved headphones out of wood and made a man sit in a bamboo control tower with stick antennas on his head. Everything looked exactly right. The form was perfect. But no planes landed because they were missing the essential thing, and they didn't even know what it was. And I see the same thing in what passes for science in a lot of fields. Education research, criminal justice theory, psychology studies. They've got all the forms of scientific investigation. They collect data, they write papers, they have conferences. It looks like science, but the results don't work. The reading scores don't go up. The crime rates don't go down. The therapeutic methods don't cure anyone. What's missing? Integrity, a specific kind of scientific honesty that goes beyond just not lying. It means bending over backwards to show how you might be wrong. It means reporting the things that don't fit your theory, not just the things that do. It means when you advertise your results, you include all the evidence against your conclusion alongside all the evidence for it. Let me give you an example. There was an ad I saw that said Wesson oil doesn't soak through food. That's technically true. But the thing they don't tell you is that no oil soaks through food when you cook it at the right temperature. And at the wrong temperature, they all soak through, including Wesson. The statement is true, but the implication is completely misleading. That's the difference between not lying and actually being honest. In real science, nature is the ultimate judge. Other experimenters will repeat what you did. If you were sloppy or dishonest, it will come out. But in cargo cult science, there's no such check. Nobody goes back and verifies. Nobody asks why the reading program that was supposed to work didn't work. Here's a story that should make every scientist uncomfortable. Millikan measured the charge on an electron using his oil drop experiment. And he got an answer that was a little bit off because he used the wrong value for the viscosity of air. Now, if you look at the history of electron charge measurements after Millikan, something interesting happens. The next guy gets a number a little higher than Millikan's. The next one, a little higher still, then a little higher. Slowly, they creep up to the correct value. Why didn't they jump to the right answer immediately? Because whenever someone got a number that was far from Millikan's, they'd think something must be wrong, and they'd find a reason to throw it out. But when they got a number close to Millikan's, they didn't look as hard for errors, so they gradually filtered their way to the truth instead of finding it directly. That's what happens when you let your expectations bias your observations. The first principle is you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. After you've not fooled yourself, it's actually pretty easy not to fool other scientists. You just have to be honest in a conventional way. But that first step, the not fooling yourself part, that's the hard one. Because you want your theory to work. You want your experiment to confirm your hypothesis. You want your reading program to teach kids to read. And so you unconsciously nudge things in the direction of the answer you're hoping for. I've spent my whole career watching smart people fool themselves. Philosophers who can't define a brick. Conference attendees who can't agree on what ethics means. Researchers who produce perfect-looking studies that don't actually predict anything. And islanders in bamboo-controlled towers waiting for planes that will never come. The cure is simple to describe and nearly impossible to practice. Be willing to find out you're wrong. Welcome the evidence that destroys your beautiful theory. Celebrate the experiment that fails because it just told you something true. That's not easy. That's not natural. But that's science. Everything else is cargo cult.